And welcome to Life Support Live, the weekly live show that explores how Star Trek can help us to boldly go in our own lives to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
As the famous starship captain once said, and as another famous starship captain once said, wherever our mission takes us, we'll try to have a little fun along the way.
Hello, everyone. I am psychologist Dr. Mattu.
And I'm Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek. And one of us is actually a real doctor.
And as always, we'll leave it to you to figure out who that might be. On this week's episode, we're actually talking about something very close to my heart, which is good and bad therapy. We're going to have a lot of fun today. And just to get things started, why don't you let us know in the comments below what you think makes for good or bad therapy, and we're going to be looking at Star Trek for some examples of all of that stuff. If this is your first time here, welcome. We are so happy to have you here. Dr. Trek, what is this? What are we doing here?
Well, if I have to tell you, then I'm just leaving right now.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long show because I'm not sure.
No. We want to welcome everybody, whether you're a veteran face around here, veteran voice, or if you're new, you found your way in. That's welcome. We go boldly through uncertain times. This is what we like to think of is a very unique show, very unique. Not on its use of adjectives though, where we geek out just like anybody else can over Star Trek through the lens of mental health. Or it's a mental health show where we geek out through Star Trek. Either way, we have a lot of fun.
A little column B.
Hopefully it sends you away. Yeah. Hopefully send you away with some takeaways too, but have a lot of fun as we go along. And today's, this week right now, at this particular time, we're being inspired by the events of the new Lower Decks every week. But we're going to look at all of Star Trek. And yes, we do know that not everyone is getting Lower Decks at the moment. Yep. So we'll be as non-spoilery as we can while, give a nod.
Yeah, we're inspired by Lower Decks, but we're not diving into the whole spoiler commentary about it. If we did, there's a lot we could talk about, especially in this week's episode. This is also an interactive show. We want to hear from you. You can always comment below. We also have, at the end of the show, we open up the hailing frequency. So if you'd like to call into the show, or if you want to voice in is call in. If you want to appear in the show, you can do that too. Just send us a message on Skype at Life Support Host, and we'd love to welcome you onto the show. Mm-hmm. So, Larry, this week we're talking about good and bad therapy. This episode today that we're discussing is really inspired by this week's episode of Lower Decks. We also got a lot of inspiration for this episode from our Facebook group. We asked everyone for suggestions, and this seemed to be really the topic people wanted to talk about. So we see an example of a counselor aboard the Cerritos, and that therapy session that we see really inspires what happens in the rest of the episode. Mm-hmm. There's so much we could talk about in this episode, Larry, but I'm just wondering picture. Yeah, but let's not.
No.
What were your thoughts about this episode before we dive into good and bad therapy? What did you think?
Well, just overall, I think that I know we're not talking about spoilers, so I won't be spoilery here, but I really think I had a radical, bold thought. I'm going to say it more this week as it goes along. I'm about to decide that Lower Decks is the most complete and cogent Star Trek series out of the gate since the original series, and maybe even more than the original series.
Wow. I didn't think about things in that lens before. If I do think about things in that lens, out of the gate, and we've got one more episode left of the first season, but I think you're right. The first season, this is a very strong first season where we are seeing both an arc to characters, episode for episode. Things are mostly solid to good. There haven't really been episodes where I thought, ooh, wow, well, this is really the weak link here. This is a very strong first season, and this episode in particular, I think it did something that I was about to say that life support does so well, but I mean lower decks. We both start with L, so it's a little tricky for my brain on a Saturday morning here in California.
I can see you getting them confused. They're both such high professional quality.
Right, totally, yeah. We're both so animated. This episode in particular, it did what lower ducks. It did what Lower Decks does so well. It both was able to have a good laugh at Star Trek, while also having something to say on its own, having something to say about these characters, and that balance. I think that balance was really the best here. Lower Decks starts with some. The first episode, I think, is really hard for folks because the comedy doesn't feel as grounded in Star Trek. But
it's an adjustment.
It's an adjustment. Yeah, this episode, boy, does it pay things off.
Yeah, and I don't want to. Now I feel like we're teasing a lot for people that can't see it, but not. I'm not trying to get too overwhelmed. I'm not one to usually think around and sit about superlatives or think about contests, among the Star Treks. I mean, it just hit me this week that I'm enjoying the show so much. And yeah, I know there are things to wince about. As it's gone along, the things that concerned me in the beginning now are paid. They're not just random accidents of sloppy creation, or oh, look, it's the inevitable start. We always talk about, it takes every Star Trek 3 years to get really good. That's what I'm talking about. Now, on the other hand, we said 2 years ago, what do you mean it takes you 10? It makes you 2 years to do 10 little half-hour cartoons. What do you mean it takes 2 years? Well, now it's like I understand why it took them 2 years, and it wasn't just drawing, detailed plans of every background prop in the original series. It's that they actually really cohesively coordinated the arc of development of everything, of all. Yes. I don't want to say all 8 characters, but the vast majority, all 8 characters, and a lot of other subliminal sidebar pieces too. Anyway, we're going on and on about the show, but I mean that was my thought out the gate. Now, our topic here was the theme of the week for the show, or one of the themes of the week for the show. But they all, I don't want to say they're seamless, but oh my God, they're just. I really enjoy it. What's happened is I've strung along. I've really enjoyed it now for 6, 7, 8 weeks in a row, and I see where they're going, and it feels like there's been a lot of conscious thought into how they've built the show up and all the characters, and the way and the whole. I know that in the back of their mind, the meta of all this is they knew that we would be going, what, a cartoon show? What? And this kind of humor and this whole heightened, on steroids kind of humor, but now we're all used to it. It's like I said one time, it's like watching a Shakespeare play, and it always takes you 5 or 10 minutes to get your ears and your brain synced into the language of Shakespeare.
Into the language,
after that opening 5 or 10 minutes, most of the time you've kind of settled in, and by the time you're going along, you're into it by then, which is true of almost anything.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think we're very much acclimated to the language, to the characters, to the look, absolutely, and it pays off. I don't want to ruin anything for anyone with this episode because there's a lot of joy in it. But if you're a longtime fan of Star Trek, there was something in this episode for everyone. There are both visual and musical. References and little love letters, and sometimes in that love letter, just a little poke, just a little making fun.
A swipe.
A little swipe. Yeah, I love that in this one episode they were able to make fun of some of the original movies, some of the Next Generation movies, and even some of the Kelvin timeline.
What do you mean,
Really,
even some of the?
a lot. There might have been a
Yeah,
lot
they
of
were pretty equal
Kelvin.
opportunity, I think, across the board.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But
they
the
looked at
whole
all of them as if all the movies are like equal or something. It was kind of a radical concept.
Yeah, Tim says over here, having been unconvinced with Lower Decks at the beginning, the series has actually improved as it's continued. It's a welcome return to episodic stories, how Star Trek works best. I agree, Tim, and it's both episodic while also having a very small arc. There's an arc to the characters, and that I enjoy. I think it's you can jump in and out very easily, and if you're watching it from beginning to end, you're seeing development with the characters, which is different, Larry, than Star Trek Picard or Star Trek Discovery, where there's a big story arc where the larger story is going. Here, it's the focus is more on the character arcs, which does feel it feels like a condensed like Next Generation kind of approach to things. So, yeah, but let's get to therapy.
Hmm.
Let's get to therapy. This episode,
Good and bad. Yes,
good and bad. Yeah, I got a lot to say about both of those.
I knew you would.
This is I want our audience to. This is a topic that Larry and I have been dancing around for a long time, and Larry, you helped me to just really press engage on it this week. And I think I've been avoiding it a little bit because I've got such strong feelings about it. So thank you for helping me to approach this thing. You've been a good
Well,
therapist on this topic.
we danced around exactly how to, it's amazing when we're talking because currently right now, and maybe we'll keep this, we don't know we're talking, but for sure after Discovery is done and we're back in the land of no new Trek every week, we were dancing around exactly how to take a theme and frame it so that it was true to the show, but also how it applied to everything else in Trek. Have we not done it yet? Does it apply at all to the real world right now? I mean,
Yep.
all these topics do. Are they topical? But
Yes.
there's always something for right now. Sometimes with the pandemic, with the world we're in, the politics, the racial upheaval, injustice upheaval, climate. I mean, whatever. Yeah, just whatever's going on in the world right now, we try to relate it to a little bit, just because of the way everything seems to filter down to our normal everyday lives. So. Hopefully there's anyway, look at through all those topics. We were trying to see, well, so how do we frame this? And we knew it was around, we went from anger management to something around therapy and how to frame that. And so we came up with this. But yeah, you've been talking about that Esri scene with Garrick since the day I met you. So
Oh my gosh! Yeah, we'll get to Esri. We'll get to Esri. Yeah. But oh man,
don't get
we'll
choked
get there.
up, man.
I know. With this Lower Decks episode, we see a therapist, and we see the therapist also give one of the crew a recommendation on ways to work on her anger. And then the rest of the episode is really about her journey, trying to find a way to work through that anger on her own. And if you want to talk about good and bad therapy, this therapist is really obsessed with food, and all of this therapist's metaphors are all food based, which I think would get kind of annoying for folks, but it's funny. But let's use that as a starting off point for talking about good and bad therapy. And we're not focusing so much on physical therapy or speech therapy. There's a lot of forms of therapy out there, but we're talking about mental health. We're talking about, in the most formal sense, someone who is a trained professional who is helping people work through their mental health goals. But we'll also probably touch upon less formal professionals, but people who are fulfilling that role in someone else's life. They might not be a trained professional, but they have a lot of experience that might help them to help other people with their emotions, with their thoughts, with situations they're really stuck in. So, Larry.
They're just wise and empathetic and not toxic.
and serve a mean rectigino. We're speaking of which, I am fully prepped and loaded here. Larry,
Oh,
where do you want to start on this epic journey that we are about to embark on today?
Well, it all started a little 5,000 alt radio station in Encino, California. Oh wait, that's Ted Baxter. I don't know where that came from. That's Mary Tyler Moore, not Bob Newhart, which you would think would be our thing. No, let's start. Why don't we start with the original series? And to
Sure.
me, in the series, the series that had no counselor, except that they did. There was a staff psychologist on the Enterprise in one episode.
Right.
Yeah, Helena Noel. But when I think of formal or informal counseling on the original series, I have to go to my man McCoy,
Yeah.
who sometimes people accused of being a little crusty, but no, especially with Kirk as his friend. But there you can find a moment where, obviously with Spock, and even a couple of times some of the junior crew in sickbay, not formally, obviously. And then that moment there, by the time we get to them, and there's some great original series moments. Don't destroy the one named Kirk, which I always thought is a belabored token on the nose. Oh, look, it's a big speech from McCoy, but it does fulfill what we're talking about here. But the one that really hits me as organic is the damn it, Bones, tell me what you really think
Yes.
moment from Wrath of Khan that we're talking about there.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah.
and they don't talk about having it now, and continues. We had Dr. McKenna as an experimental program for counseling, and they acted. It's amazing. Original series would go back and forth between talking about how McCoy obviously is acting as a psychologist for the crew in his big demand, but then again turn around, I'm a surgeon, not a psychiatrist. They would play with that, but he's clearly, if there's anyone in the crew that's going to do that function, it's him, especially with Kirk, in the function
Yeah.
of keeping the captain going. And that scene's just a classic.
I love that scene, and it's one that I always go back to as an example in many of our episodes because I think it shows so much. There's great friendship there, but there's also McCoy is able to help push Kirk further. There's a trust and a relationship there. And when we ask, we've gotten a lot of good responses, and we're going to go through these in a moment. But when I ask that question about what makes for good therapy, I think at the heart of it, I just don't think, but there's data on this as well. You've got nothing if you don't have a relationship. If you don't trust the other person, and if you don't feel like they have your best interests at heart, and you can really share with this person what you need to in an honest way, nothing's going to work. They could have the most experience in the most advanced, effective treatment for the problem you have. But if you don't trust them, nothing's going to happen. And what you see with McCoy and Kirk is this profound sense of trust. McCoy can call out Kirk on his stuff, and Kirk trusts him that you care about me. That's why you're telling me this. When he goes off on him, I'm gonna paraphrase, and I'm gonna paraphrase Bradley, but he's like, damn it, Jim, other people have a birthday and it's a celebration. Why does yours feel like a funeral?
Yep.
There's trust there. He can say that.
Yeah. And you're right. Any relationship between a counselor, therapist, whatever, and a patient, client, you have to have the trust. And a lot of times, if you go into a formal situation and you don't know the counseling person, part of the beginning is about establishing some kind of a trust.
Yeah.
If it's not at a deficit, it's at least at a blank slate level.
Yes.
But what also is about that scene is they're off. Neither one of them is in uniform there. They're off duty.
Yeah.
But they've known each other for 20, 30 years by that point. So they're in the guise of friends. There's no starship at stake here. There's no crew. It's just life to life.
And there's also no dirt on their shoes. It's the 24th century or 23rd century. There's no dirt.
We've had Roombas for 10 years, so of course there's.
That's right. Yeah, they vaporize all dirt. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's transcended mere, doctor patient there to just it's friends. It's friends, but it's the same kind of dynamic that when there is when they are in uniform and when there is a crisis going, that's part of the reason why their success rate is so high. That's part of the
Yeah.
reason why they're the only ship to return from this 5-year mission intact. Uh,
Well,
because they had that.
I love what you're saying there, Larry, and it's absolutely true. When you're starting, there's almost no trust, and the trust has to be earned. It has to be built, and in some situations, it's easier than others. If you're an adult and if you sought out this treatment yourself, and if you have if you've had a lot of choice in the matter, then you might be starting with a little bit more trust. But if you're a teenager or if you're a child and you might not want to be in this situation, or if you're doing couples therapy or family therapy and you feel like you're being dragged into this, trust might be a little bit low. And it really has to be earned. Or another situation, if you're dealing with tough stuff, if you are concerned, like, what will happen if I disclose this information to this other person? If you're having suicidal thoughts, things like that, you might be worried, well, what's this therapist going to do with this information? Or, Larry, this came up too when I worked on a college counseling center. Sometimes people were afraid, if I tell you these things, are they going to get back to my professors? And so part of trust has to be, hey, here's how this works. Here's the kind of things you can tell me. If you tell me these other kind of things, here's what's going to happen. You really need to be very clear as a therapist in that very first meeting. What are the parameters and how does this work? And we're going to get into this with Troy, but being a counselor, being a therapist, being a psychologist in the military is a little bit different than being a therapist, psychologist in civilian life.
Right.
So, and I think Star Trek explores that actually quite well. So yeah, speaking of probably the most well-known counselor in the 24th century, should we jump into...
And beyond.
Beyond. Yeah. Should we jump into the next generation and talk about our favorite counselor, Deanna Troi?
Yeah. This was actually that moment there with Barclay from Hollow Pursuits. Really, the first time we also saw her counseling the mother that had lost the crew woman who had lost had a big loss. They actually that's like the third season. They finally built her that office with the wavy couch. Because it's part of the story of Troy where it was all about being the empath. I feel pain. And then the pilot goes down. They went, that really doesn't work. We can't have her screaming emotions out, what she feels. So then it was kind of like, Then there was this whole year-long dive, talk about shows trying to find themselves. It was this year-long, what are we going to do with her then? We can have her we can have her on with the first contacts, and she's advising the captain, and and she knows languages and all this. And it's like somebody finally woke up and said, well, she's a counselor. Why don't you show her counseling the crew? Like, duh. It's like it took 3 years for people to go, oh, wait, she's supposed to be a counselor. Does she counsel the group? Yes. It's like it took 2 years to show them, and not just talking to one of the leads going, well, how about what she does for 1,100 people? So,
yes.
that's the bit with Barclay. There was just, even as they didn't even have a set for her office until that year and those episodes. So that, and it was something they got into the gate late on. And as we can see, maybe not always written. We're still needing layman writers to write about psychology and counseling issues. So that didn't always happen. But by and large, I think, I don't know, this is a radical theory. I think probably lots of people would agree, but it's like her counseling got better the more the series went on and the movies and even into her spin-off appearances.
I agree, Larry, and my feelings here are so mixed. I think there's some stuff that is just absolutely phenomenal about Counselor Troi. What I find so powerful and inspiring is this idea that on the flagship of the Federation, the Enterprise D in the 24th century, mental health is so important that the ship's counselor is right there front and center. Is literally front and center on the bridge, right
center
next
right.
to the captain,
Yeah.
or center right. Yeah, it's center right. And there's a lot of stuff that's really wonderful there. That this mental health is in so many ways normalized, and also by training she's a psychologist, and she's serving in many of the different roles that a psychologist does in the military. And we can have a debate about whether Starfleet is military or not. I think Pike's description of it being a peacekeeping armada is a pretty good one. A scientific peacekeeping armada. Let's go with that. But the different roles that someone who has Deanna Troy's expertise, she's fulfilling those quite well. So not only is she involved in treatments and service delivery, as we see with Barclay specifically, many times throughout the series, throughout other series as well. But she also is, as you said, providing advice to Captain Picard on matters relating to culture and negotiation and understanding of different species and where they're coming from. That's a role that a lot of people with psychological expertise serve. The other role that she fulfills is with Commander Riker, sometimes maybe affectionately known as Commander Troy, maybe later on. But
well, among their closest friends, maybe. Yeah.
Right.
In the beginning.
In the beginning, and maybe later too. But with Riker, the two of them work together on personnel reports and evaluation of personnel. That's maybe most famously from our favorite Tapestry. You see that in action.
Yes, Tapestry.
Right?
Well, also in the episode Lower Decks.
Right. The episode that inspired Lower Decks. Yeah, absolutely. You see that there. And that's a role that a lot of people with psychological mental health expertise serve as well. We see that in HR, in civilian life, but that's actually in World War I. That is what a lot of psychologists did in the United States. They did a lot of assessments about what role different soldiers should be serving, where they should be deployed, right. what branch. A lot of the assessments back then were pretty biased and racist. We can get into that as well, but that's where the relationship of psychologists moving out of academia and into practice really began. It began with World War I, and with World War II, they moved from assessment to treatment. There weren't enough psychiatrists in the country to treat all we didn't call it this back then, we called it shell shock, but there weren't enough psychiatrists to treat all of the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder that soldiers were coming back with. So psychologists were given more privileges to practice more of that, and then that's kind of how my whole field of clinical psychology became changed forever. So I like all of those things, Larry, and I think Troy does those really well. At the same time, we see this.
Your other favorite moment.
I'm doing the Picard facepalm at plexing.
Okay. Wait, are we talking about like plastics and polymers when we talk about plexing?
I know, it sounds like it. So, okay, can I go on a soapbox here, Larry?
Can you what? I'm sorry?
Can I go on a soapbox if I haven't already?
I don't know. You want a soapbox, man? Get your own show. Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah. Come join me at the Psych Show. Okay, I'll make this quick. So we see, so Barclay's dealing with some stress and anxiety, and Counselor Troy talks about, well, there's this technique called plexing. I think it's a betazoid technique.
Yeah, I was gonna say she says it's a betazoid technique.
Yeah. So already, does betazoid physiology map onto human physiology? I don't know. I assume it does because she should know if plexing would work on humans. But she just kind of talks about, just kind of do this and it's going to solve your problems. I think that is what's wrong with Star Trek therapy in a nutshell. Number one, Counselor Troy does do a good job of a lot of the basic listening skills, active listening skills, stuff we talked about on last week's episode. I think Jared shared my video about how to listen like a therapist. She does all those skills well.
Stuff
But
we talked about on last week's episode.
Good reflection, Larry. I like that reflection. Like active listening, reflecting, all that. She does that well. However, the techniques are so backwards, and we see this. We'll get to this with Esri, but the way that the therapeutic techniques seem to be really based on very old, like Freudian ideas. Like modern day Freudian therapists wouldn't even be doing what Counselor Troy is doing.
Like in their 40s and the 80s?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the problem here is there are writers that were basing their writing of therapy based on either what they had seen from Woody Allen films or maybe what they had experienced. But we had really effective treatments even at that time for anxiety-based disorders like what Barkley has, and we don't see those. And we also don't see any imagination of what future therapy could look like. We don't really see the holodeck used, right? Like we have dermal regenerators. What's the mental health equivalent here? Mm-hmm. In terms of medication, that should be way more advanced. We already have medications that can kind of loosen up memories for you, or like available right now. Mm. And like, where's the 24th century equivalent of that? Right now, we already use VR therapy. We use that in a wide variety of problems. We use that in problems that are very difficult to replicate. It's used heavily in the military to treat trauma. It's also used in civilian life as well. VR therapy is so common now.
And you're saying VR, virtual reality.
Virtual reality, yeah. Star Trek has a lot better stuff. They've got the holodeck.
Yeah, why isn't you're talking about baby steps holography? Yeah.
Like we see that with other forms of training, like weapons training. I think Riker does that in the scene or I forget who's doing that, but they're doing phaser target practice. Like, why don't we see more advanced mental health techniques in Star Trek? It seems like such a failure of imagination. Why Troy both frustrates me and I'm so inspired by her. She has such an important role, and yet the methods she uses are so ineffective, antiquated, and unimaginative. So for me, watching it as a psychologist now, what frustrates me is it perpetuates this idea that therapy might be a lot of talking, but it's not a lot of effective stuff. That's what frustrates me about Troy.
So you're wishing they got back to that really high-tech, on the cutting edge of therapy, like the woo neural neutralizer machine from the 23rd century.
I would like to see if I could write my own therapist for, I don't know what the next ship is that we're going to see. I don't know, the Titan. No, we're not going to see the Titan. I don't know. We'll see some new Federation ship in Star Trek Picard Season 2, whenever that's filmed. But what I'd like to see is someone who is a good listener, like Troy, someone who's very compassionate, like Troy, but someone who's also using really imaginative techniques. Give me some new technology, yes, Larry, but I want that to be grounded in ideas of what's effective right now. We have very effective forms of treatment for a wide variety of problems, and we can talk about that in more detail if people want to hear about that. I will go into more detail in the counselor's log. But,
wait, the counselor's log? It's as if we plunged into the briefing room here and didn't put up the title.
I did not put up. Oh my gosh, everything's all wibbly wobbly today.
We've got some. I was going to say we've got some new folks this week. They're popping up in the chat, so it's good to see everybody there. We will get back into the chat. You can tell this is a topic near and dear to Dr. Ali because we Whoom. Forget the structure of the show. Whoom. Let's get going.
That's true.
That's fine.
That's
I
true.
just wanted to acknowledge we've got several new folks over here, and we are talking about Trekkie references here in the briefing room, and then eventually we're going to get to the counselor's log, where Dr. Ali gets to some real psychological bits, and then what am I missing? Something, and then we get to the away team.
The K3?
Yeah, yes.
K3! No, we first go to K3,
Well,
Larry.
I'll think about K3 down the line. That's a small part of everything, but the big chunks are this and the away mission. So yeah, so everybody keep piling.
But I have some very nice things to say about Troy. I have some, if I haven't said them already. As things move forward, Larry, I think things do get better. So starting with Pathfinder.
Her writers, not herself. It's like everything else in Star Trek. Do we blame the character, the actress, or the writer?
Marina has said this herself many times on Star Trek conventions. She's mentioned that they really based her on very old ideas of what therapy is. And I think as times move forward, like in Pathfinder, in Star Trek Voyager, when she's continuing to help Barclay, when he tracks her down when she's on vacation at the beach and says, "I need your help," what I like here is she has obviously established a relationship that makes Barclay feel very safe around her. That Barclay seeks her out, and this actually happens all the time, Larry. Is if you find a connection with a therapist you like, you want to continue working with them, even if they move away. And nowadays it's a little bit easier because there's now we have so much virtual therapy. I mean, Larry, this is the other thing. Like, we have all this like online telehealth therapy now. It's already more advanced now than what we saw with Troy on the Enterprise D. But I love that Berkeley. I love that broccoli. No, I'm kidding. That last one was
Okay.
That was
okay.
Yeah. But I love that Barclay seeks her out, and I think he's getting more effective help from Troy. And I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. The most beautiful, meaningful, emotional counseling I see with Troy, we saw this year. And that is with Picard, Star Trek Picard.
Again, out of uniform. They're not on a ship. They're long out of their roles. I remember watching that episode play out, and we're all I mean, you can't watch Nepenthe, that episode, without smiling at the reunion, at seeing everybody back together, at seeing them be so meta, because the actors are that way with each other anyway, much less their characters. And as they're sliding along with this plot, and you're catching all the backstory and all the incredible things about the Rikers being married and their kids and the tragedy of one dying. Spoilers if you haven't seen Picard, sorry. But it just effortlessly gets into here's Soji and then Picard himself, and you're watching the show and going, oh my God, this is my reaction. I'm like, oh my God, she's counseling him. Oh, it's like she just slid into it, which is what a friend who is a friend would do, much less a friend who is a counselor. But when you have this formal relationship that you've been out of for 20 years or whatever it's been. But I just remember thinking, oh my God, she's counseling him. And then I went, oh my God, the writers are doing an incredible job here, and they're doing an incredible job bringing it across, because they just slid effortlessly. And then I was like you, I'm like, I think that's the best counseling she's ever done, because it was so unaffected. It wasn't like, and now oh, counselor, would you listen to my problems and tell me what I should, And she's counseling Soji too, although it gets a typical reaction when somebody who doesn't want to be or doesn't know they're even in counseling suddenly realizes what's going on and rejects it because they have to go process, or they're not in a trust situation. She has that moment. We all think of that with Picard, but I was rewatching it last night. She has a couple of minutes with Soji first, where Soji's like,
yes.
Come on, counselor, I can't. Here's my life. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. How the hell am I supposed to trust anybody? I can't trust you, much less anybody else, and gets up and stomps off, and slams Picard and all that. So she actually was counseling earlier without much success, but at least laying the foundation before she lays into her old friend there. That we all, but yes, we all thought, wow, what an incredible scene. And I felt so. just as a person, I felt so good for Marina.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
look, she
yeah.
finally got a good, she's not in uniform, she's not in her little office, but and she's not got crazy person tracking her down at the beach. But
And she's also not floating in space.
I said crazy person. Oops, sorry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Night terrors.
Yeah.
Um, anyway,
the
I felt good for
there's
the show.
there's another aspect to that, Larry, that I think is quite realistic, which is the role of mental health experts in the military. Again, there's a lot more what we call dual relationships. Dual relationships are things where you're the person's therapist, but maybe you're also their friend. You're their psychologist, but you also you live next to them, and you might have a neighborly relationship as well. In civilian life, we try to avoid and minimize dual relationships in every way possible because they can make you less objective in therapy, and they can also
Right.
introduce ethical conflicts. So we try to avoid those at all costs. On starships and submarines and boats and in far off deployment, you might be the only mental health person for this large community of people. Now, I think the Enterprise D and certainly Deep Space Nine have more than one counselor, but many small ships might not have any, and if they do, they probably only have one.
I was
At least that's
remembering
what it seems.
last night, prepping for this, that when Esri had her Dax forced on her when she became a Trill without prep, a joined Trill without prep. She was the assistant counselor on the Destiny, and I realized that we
Yeah,
never got a formal canon explanation of how big a ship Destiny was, but
yeah.
it felt like in the mentions that it wasn't the biggest of ship classes. So I'm thinking, well, if the Destiny has an assistant counselor, that implies at least two. So,
Hmm.
then that should mean it's like, did the D with 1,100 people have a second assistant counselor running around somewhere, or I don't know. But
I think so. So the assistant counselor, what the way I understood that is
Voyager didn't have a counselor as it set out with its full crew before the
right,
caretaker. I
right. They
think Janeway at one
probably
point says something. She doesn't say we lost our counselor like we lost our CMO. She says we don't have it. We never had a counselor. So, and there
yeah,
are only about 100 people. 100, I forget what the original 120, I think. So
yeah, yeah. One of these days, someone should program that into a future version of the EMH. Um, the way I understood Esri is she was in training, and that's something that a lot of therapists they go through when you're in training. You have different placements where you're working underneath a an established counselor who's licensed, who's experienced, and you're learning from them. They're supervising you, and so my guess is in Starfleet, therapists in training do go on these placements on different ships for 6 months, a year, and they work under someone who is much more established, and then they might go on to a different starship and they might specialize. You might have therapists that are specializing in like first contact kind of missions or far off remote missions like long 5 year mission kind of things,
right.
or those who are more combat like focused, just like in the way you have therapists right now. And then she was kind of plucked out of that and then promoted way too quickly. But Troy is walking through her dual relationships right there. She's a captain's friend. She's also the captain's counselor. She also is hasn't seen him in so long, and all of those different relationships she has are playing out in that moment, which is
Mhm.
definitely something that happens to any therapist that is in the military. You're eating in the same mess hall as everyone else, and you might be the only therapist there. You have to kind of be friends, but also kind of be everyone's therapist, and you have to walk those lines. Troy walks those lines very well, and yeah, I love where it goes, and I'm so happy that Marina got that wonderful scene in Picard. Um, which brings us to Esri. Uh, So, Larry, I'm curious about your take. And comment section, we have not forgotten about you. We're gonna come back to you in a moment. I think Esri's gonna
You've just
almost
got to
get
let
us
him
to.
work through this, guys. That's all
Yeah,
I'm
I got,
saying.
I got, I got, I got to get this stuff off my chest. I promise after Esri, it's not that emotional for me. We got one more person to talk about, but give me your take, Larry, on Esri as a therapist. What's your take,
Okay,
Doctor
well,
Trek?
so before I somehow got to the first 30 or something years of my life without a lot of involvement in mental health issues and things. Pretty bland, vanilla life for the most part, aside from, occasional, especially in college when you start meeting different people and all that. But it was like becoming an instant dad and a blended family father, and things with kids, not because of a blended family, but just different people. So that's when I really got familiar with a couple of the issues the kids were going through. Got
That's a big
got for
life
me.
transition.
Yeah, well, it was for me, and I tried to realize it just on my own terms. But really, what thrust me into mental health big time was some of the issues some of the kids were having when they were smaller, and a lot of the just I don't want to say Pollyanna, but just a lot of the placeholder impressions of psychologists in the mental health field and the reality of how that plays out with going to sessions and therapy and finding a doctor and medications and all kind and the state. This is in the 90s, so the state of it then, and how, I had it was a wake up call to reality and the good and the bad of just like the way our theme is today.
Yeah.
That it wasn't just this, oh, here's a thing, and we're so modern and up to date now that we've got all, it's not the old days. We have all this stuff figured out. No, and how things are not. You can have all the theory and all the publication and all the academics and all the research in the world, but it still comes down to like you said, a one-to-one relationship. And I hadn't even been out on my own enough really to even think about finding a doctor, a medical doctor, much less a psychologist. But sometimes even that's a hard fit to find, or you can find some that are better for you than others. A dentist, much less a psychologist.
Oh yeah.
So,
Anyone in healthcare, it's hard to find someone that you
right.
really connect with.
So when I'm watching, so the first time through with DS9, it was I shouldn't say that. I was my early years of being married and being just dad water dad, as I used to say it. But as far as Esri goes, it's the seventh year of the series. They're in the middle of the Dominion War. It's sad that Terry's gone and they killed off Jadzia. And while we didn't wallow in it then the way we would do now with 24/7 social media going on, we were aware of it. There was some mystery about why she was going. Terry was going right into a sitcom called Becker. So we knew she was out, but we didn't know exactly. And so there was some discomfort, but
Right.
in true to form, they were keeping it, kind of under wraps. And bang, here's
Right.
the new person, and everybody's all upbeat about it. And I'm on the lot and I'm working. And I remember I did the first interview with Nikki. It was like in her new trailer. And they were like, oh, go. We did a cover story on the Communicator about her. And I went over and did, if not the first, one of the first, but I think maybe the first, full blown interview. She'd been acting before and had some roles in a Canadian show. I forget the name of it. But so it was all about her and the character. But everybody was well aware, wow, they're bringing this a replacement in the last year of a series is a tough thing to pull off for the
Yeah.
actor, for the
Yes.
writers, for the other cast. And on that level, I thought it was wonderful, and they integrated her. It's like they were integrating her at the same time they were having episodes that didn't even use the regulars. Famously, a Paper Moon, and with we've talked about that with Nog and Vic Fontaine, and the regulars are all like sidelined, which was kind of a radical idea, just producing
Yeah.
a show.
Yeah. It was. Yeah.
So it almost makes like having a brand new regular the last season. Not that, but it is. So anyway, so my mind was really on all those issues, and I gotta admit to you that sitting there and critiquing Esri as a counselor was not like high on my list of things to
Yeah.
critique character over. So
Yeah.
I don't have a lot to say about that. I could go back and watch now, but I'm gonna have to lean to your. That's what I have to say about that. That I wasn't paying attention. I was looking at the 47 other things going on with the character besides her counseling technique. Except that I thought that it was interesting. There was a counselor on DS9 before Esri.
Yes. Yes.
There's like one reference to you should go see Dr. Telnori, who we
Yeah.
never see. We don't
Yeah.
even know what species it is, much less anything. So they did have one to the whole point of do they have a just like as Lower Decks was going along, I'm like, I wonder if the Cerritos is big enough to have a
Yeah.
counselor,
Yeah.
which was answered this week.
Yeah.
But so they did have a counselor. Once Starfleet arrived, yay, modern psychology, kids, and so I was intrigued that of all the roles they could have Esri play, that they decided on a counselor's niche for that, and then to have her be as amateur at not amateur, but as young to counseling as she is at being a joined trill, which just was character texture. That's what they're going to play with.
Yeah. Yeah. So my
So sorry,
experience, my
that's
experience actually, Larry, is quite similar to yours. I've seen DS9 beginning to end 2 times in my life. Once as it was airing, but during that time, I think I missed the first few seasons, and that was actually well before I was a therapist or a psychologist. I wasn't even anywhere near training at that time.
you weren't
So
born a psychologist.
I'm born with a pen and pad in my hand. No, I was quite far away from that. The first time I watched Deep Space Nine, I was quite more focused on how are these larger arcs going to resolve themselves. And Esri is introduced in the context of Cisco trying to figure out what's happening. And so you kind of go on that ride with Esri, and I felt very similarly as you did. I wasn't quite focused on the development of this character. And then as Vix is introduced, I was like, why are they introducing another thing here? Like, let's stick to the big picture, folks. We got a war we need to resolve. We have Cisco's journey to kind of complete here. And what are you doing with Ducat? Oh my gosh. Season 7 of DS9 felt like such whiplash at times when I first watched it. On the repeat watch, which I did 3 years ago, 3 years ago, where I did it beginning to end again. What I noticed it a lot more, and at that time, I'm also now a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a lot of experience doing all this sort of stuff, and at that point, what's that? I'd been corrupted. Yeah. With this watch, Esri's character really stuck out to me in many ways. There's some good, there's some bad, and there's some like ugly moments with her character that I really didn't like. And I think the one that really frustrates me, Starfleet is Lower Decks actually explains this well. That we're Starfleet officers. We might be lower deckers, but we're really good at what we do. We're well trained. Everyone here has a job to do, and they do it well. That's what Starfleet's all about. And up to this point, most of our regulars were actually good at their jobs. No one ever questioned Bashir's medical abilities. They might question his ethics in doing experimental treatments on patients he gets too close to. There's that stuff. We might question decisions that people make. We can spend hours debating Cisco in the Pale Moonlight. Did he make the right decision? But we don't really question their abilities. When you send O'Brien to go fix something, you know it's going to get fixed. My problem with Esri is she really seemed like the first character who didn't really know what she was doing with her job. Like, she wasn't good at her job. And we see this specifically, you dug up a nice image about this, Larry, with Garrick. So Garrick is dealing with claustrophobia.
It's your favorite scene.
It's, oh my gosh.
Your favorite episode.
This episode grinds my gears.
After image, yes.
And it's been actually set up in previous episodes. When I remember it most specifically in the episode where Garrick, Bashir, and
They're in the
Worf.
Dominion prison camp, the
Yes.
internment camp. Yeah.
Yes, and Garrick has to work in those close quarters, and he's trying to. I forget what he's doing. He's trying to tech the tech, I think. That's what he's
They're
trying to do
trying to
there.
get a signal out. They're trying to escape.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah.
Yes. They're setting up this his anxiety about being in close spaces where he can't escape. Very real condition with actually a very real treatment. I've done a lot of exposure therapy and helping people learn how to be in these situations, how to cope with them, how to navigate them. It's very much a treatable problem. But what frustrates me about Esri in that moment is she's completely unprepared to support Garrick, and it's very hard for me to believe, Larry, that given the 24th century, being an assistant counselor, that she wouldn't, number one, be able to look up what's the effective treatment for this, because we already have this. We've already had this for decades. It also, to me, seems very irresponsible to put someone who is, as Spock would say, emotionally compromised in a role where she has to support the emotional mental health of other people. We don't do that now. If I am really struggling and overwhelmed because I've just been joined with a symbiote that is like, and I need time to figure all this stuff out, maybe I shouldn't be actively serving in a role where I have to support other people's emotions. So from the technique standpoint, it doesn't hold up to me. From the ethics standpoint, it doesn't hold up to me. Number three, I think this is something that people have been discussing a little bit in the comments section, that she makes it about her. She makes the treatment about her own challenges, her own anxieties, and a good therapist never makes a treatment ever about them. It's not about you. It's about the person you're trying to help. And strike number 4, Larry, for me, I just don't buy it as a Starfleet officer. Everyone in Star Trek is really good at what they do. That's one of the most inspiring things to me about Starfleet. I just do not buy that they would do this. And to me, strike number 5, it gets back to my concern about Next Generation, is we're uplifting mental health as this important part about the ship, but we might be perpetuating stereotypes and stigma about mental health by showing a therapist who clearly does not know what they're doing. And it might make people think that this is what therapy is actually like. I've said my
Having
piece,
just
Larry.
rewatched that episode last night, or most of it, can I just say
Please.
yes to everything you just said, and that was the point. If nothing,
Larry, why do you do this? Why do you say things that make me see things in completely new light, almost as if you are Dr. Trek? Okay.
it's almost as if
please.
I was not a fake doctor. No,
please tell me.
it's like there is a scene. But I guess from the counselor's point of view, if you are so at wit's end as a counselor that your patient calls out your biggest flaw, which Garrick does. Garrick isn't just lashing out at her out of pain and claustrophobia and anger and all that. He looks at her and says, "You're totally messed up. What right do you have to sit here and talk to me?" I mean, he's insulted almost.
Yeah.
Beyond the fact that she's a Starfleet counselor, he's a civilian. You know, oh, look, we're all one big happy family here on DS9 because we're all isolated and off together. Plus, now it's a war. We're not the station at the end of the universe. We're
right.
we're at war. We're at now we're the Casablanca here. We're the crossroads. And
I've never thought about it in that sense, but I love that.
You never thought about DS9 as a Casablanca?
No, but I totally see it. No. This is what Larry does, folks. I think Libby is right. I think you are you. I want to feel your ear right now because you might be possessed by some kind of paw wraith. You have this way of making me see things in a new light. I never thought about it.
Well, then, yay. Very good, Padawan. Very good, cadet. So,
you're crossing the streams.
No, but so the point of the story is, yes, this is texture, not trivia, in a psych way here now. Yes, she's a mess up right now, he calls, and number one, her patient calls her out on it, and it's obvious,
Yes.
and everybody,
Yeah.
but that's how far gone she is. And everybody else is running around fighting a war. They're not worried about what their new junior little psychologist is doing. They've got a war to fight. And Cisco's got a messed up head to, his own thing, and everybody's got their own
Yeah.
stuff they're dealing with. And in a
Yeah.
meta way, they should all go, whoa, wait a minute, we're under a lot of stress here. We should make sure that our new counselor is at their best. And if there's something that but then you got the drama, not just made up TV drama, but that happens in real things don't go by the book in real life, especially
Yeah.
when there's a crisis going on. There's a war going on. And Jadzia, it's on one hand, she's not, it's not like they went, oh, we've got now I'm trying to remember if he says we've got a counselor opening or what. See, it's like, what drove this?
I think he says we have some kind of counselor opening / Dax, I can't lose you. I need you in my life.
That's what I'm saying. Is it a fact
Yeah.
that they have a slot open as a counselor, or it's Cisco feeling vulnerable without a Dax at his side?
Yeah.
Nathaniel up above, way at the beginning here, we haven't dipped into the chat much, but I said something about McCoy and Kirk and, counseling the commander. And Nathaniel very early said, as in Dax to Cisco, that the informal, Dax was the science officer, but she was counseling him because she's 300 years old and knew him in a past life.
Yes.
And
yes.
so it's kind of like an RHIP rank has its privileges thing here, where Cisco is like, I want just like Kirk says, I want a Vulcan as my science officer / maybe buddy in motion picture, because that's what he's used to and that's his comfort zone. And he's trying to project his old thing into a new situation, which wouldn't have been the same if he'd had Sonak there on the bridge, right?
No.
I mean, on motion
Right.
picture. Well, same way, Cisco had no idea just having the next Dax host might have been a plumber. It's, I'm sorry, we've got O'Brien. We don't need you, but I want you here anyway.
Yeah.
They've got they've got Rom, much less O'Brien. So he's got, it's like, is Esri really there because of the counseling need or because of the Dax need for Cisco? And so it's both. But that's what's overlapping her. It's kind of like, I'm not fully trained. I don't care. I'm not used to being joined yet. I don't care. So that's overriding everything. So now you're in a situation where just go do your job. We'll worry about you being kidnapped and made a hostage and being thrown into the war and having to pick up a gun and fight in a battle. We'll worry about that later. Right now, just go do your little DS90 job.
Yeah.
And she comes back and goes, oh, I'm such a fuck up. And he's like, get it together, man or woman or whatever, So
yeah, I think that's a good read.
I am sorry, Ali, that everything is not by the book here in the middle of a wartime situation on the front line in the Casablanca. You can laugh once again. The Casablanca of the war. So, yes.
Very good points. Very good points. Heidi says, is it making people see a thing in a different light? What a good therapist should help you to do. And you're absolutely right, Heidi. And that's what Larry...
see herself in a new light, in a different light.
Larry consistently does this for me with Star Trek. You are my Star Trek therapist, Larry. You are my Dr. Trek, quite literally. And I think you're right here. There is something to be said about wartime deployment, and we have real life and fictional examples we have real life examples with mental health, and we have fictional examples in Star Trek where people are being deployed or promoted in a wartime crisis situation, and they might not be ready for it, but we have slots that we need to fill. And hey, if it makes Cisco feel better to have an old colleague and friend with him, and Dax is really just serving the purpose of being Cisco's own personal therapist, then fine. I think Starfleet would be like, whatever helps Ben, let's give it to him. We need him to be in tip-top shape,
So
I think there's...
how did Pale Moonlight happen then? It's funny. If he's got his own personal therapist to win the war, then yay. And then we've got Pale Moonlight happening. So
that's a whole nother episode.
She's a junior counselor, still learning her. Yeah, it's like, oh, look.
There's one more therapist I want to talk about, and she's actually one of my favorites for another reason. And this is Admiral Cornwell from Star Trek Discovery.
Cornwell.
Sorry. I'm off my game here today, Larry. Cornwell. And
it's been a week, Ali. We're all yes.
Yes, it has.
We're all feeling our new joined trillness this week. Yeah.
Yes, that is absolutely true. This she only really has one scene where you see her do some type of counseling, and it's this scene right over here. However, I love her character. I really I love her journey. I love her arc. I love how she approaches things. One of the things that I love about her is she has moved up from being a counselor to being an admiral. And I love this idea that in Starfleet, there are many pathways to the Admiralty. There are many pathways and many jobs that are that Starfleet really values and will move you up. We see that with Counselor Troy in The Next Generation when she's going for her bridge officers training. And you mentioned that a few weeks ago, Larry, where Troy was helping Riker, and then Riker's helping Troy later on with the bridge officers training.
Years
and
apart.
yeah, very and I love that kind of bookending that time together on TNG. Not only is it a beautiful scene where Cornwell really helps this other person who's struggling with their mental health in that moment. And it shows that like mental health doesn't have to be a long, big thing. Sometimes just a few meetings with someone can be enough to help them. It can kind of put you on the right path, which is what I think we see with Lower Decks. It's comical, but the Lower Decks therapist does give the guidance that does then help this character to do the thing themselves. But the other part I love about Cornwell is she is in a position of leadership, and no one's saying like she's a therapist. Like, why are we listening to her?
She's not a real admiral.
She's not a real admiral. Yes, yeah. None of that is on the plate. I really love her character for a lot of it, and then obviously like where her character ends up and what she does for everyone. I love her character.
Well, and then to throw this in, I love the way, and that scene starts. I remember that episode going by, and it's all poor Discovery. It's so wrapped up in the whole serialized storytelling, and that's okay. But it's all by then it's all about the Red Angel and the suit, and oh my God, and what's this all mean? And in the middle of all that, they're still trying to tell the Culber and Stamets, the Stabber, the Colmer relationship story, and this wacky sci-fi, to hell and back kind of thing, to mycelial and back. And he's wandering around the ship, and he wanders into her, not wanders, but he comes into her room, and the way that scene opens up that we just showed, he goes, I hear you are a counselor, and she says, I used to be she says something like, I used to be a therapist. And she doesn't say it like, like it's some Western where it's like, well, I used to be a gunfighter, but I lost my nerve. It's not like that. She's like, you instantly get it that she's gone on and trained and has a much broader, but you never, you can't take the counselor out of the counselor kind of a thing.
No,
it's just like, just like Troy in Nepenthe. It's like she instantly goes back into that muscle set, that toolbox, and goes back to it. You can't do it all your life without doing it. And that's what I loved about that scene, was not that just that she did it and that they wrote a scene like that, but that they had a character that not only rose from counseling ranks into the flag ranks, but then could like go, well, it's not like she forgot it, or I'm so rusty at doing this. No, she just kind of sat down, and what the moment needed, that was that. Now, I would also argue, though, that we saw her do this more than once, only though informally, and in a typical muddied Star Trek way, especially a muddy Discovery way, when she comes in to check on Lorca before they all realize he's a Mirror Universe Lorca. Remember? And they actually reignite their as lovers, and they sit together. And all through that whole arc of her checking on him, that little moment in that episode, she comes to check on him to see what the hell's up with him. Has he lost it? In a counselor-ish way. And then when they talk, they reignite their old passion. They sleep together. And then she's freaked out when it's like, wait, it's like, who is this fake? She starts to get it, that this is a fake before we know exactly, except we know something is going on. And I kept thinking he'd been like recruited by Section 31. I didn't think about the Mirror Universe thing until it was in your face. But she knows something is up.
Until it was the mirror reflection, the evil mirror reflection. I was like, oh, okay, I see.
Well, he had scars on his. He had the different scars on his back that she's freaked out
Yeah.
about, and all that.
Yeah.
And it's probably been it's been at least a year or two since she's seen him physically. But anyway,
Yeah.
but I would say that in that way, she starts to dance down the road of using counselor techniques to see what's up with him as a commanding officer. And then, yeah, it all gets muddy when they go back and reignite their personal relationship. But then she kind of snaps back into it. Then when he is acting bizarre, whether she's interacting with him or not, definitely her counselor skills are going when she's trying to figure out what the hell's going on with him. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep. I agree.
In a strategic way for her benefit.
Yeah. Jamal says that
His-
Cornwell was a mixed bag, total fail, and not recognizing Lorca, but did well with Ghost Doctor. Didn't deserve to go out the way she did. Jamal, I would say that the way she went out was honorable, and definitely is a testament to how much she cares about the crew. I do hope we get to see more of her, maybe in Strange New Worlds. That would be great. She's a great character, great actor, and I think the whole her not recognizing Lorca is wrapped up with a lot of the other stuff Discovery was dealing with season 1 behind the scenes and all that. But I'm glad we had her. Larry, we had outlined other characters to talk about who serve in therapist kind of roles, but are not quite therapists. Do you want to do a quick?
I know we had a late start, everybody. We were like 15 minutes late starting the show or getting into it, so we're running a little late. I actually, Ali, since we were a little late, I need to get out as close to noon as I can today. We need to get going, but we've got so many more things to talk about.
Let's go warp speed then, and then we're gonna do a warp speed counselor's log, and then jump into K3. How about that? So the counselor's log is when we do. Usually, it's a deeper dive into the psychology and the science behind what we're talking about.
You've been doing it all along, though.
I've been doing it all along.
Yeah.
No, I know. It's hard for me to. I can't unravel the tapestry that is good and bad therapy.
It's a bad day for bad therapy.
Oh, folks, you just experienced a reference to tapestry and then an impression back to back. Jared must be jumping up and down with excitement right now. There we go. Have a
combination
have
Live
coffee.
Sport Live and Ozzy Osbourne fan club reunion. Yeah.
Folks, I'm just going to go through a quick checklist. I have a video called Signs You're Getting Bad Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And not everyone goes to see a cognitive behavioral therapist. There's different forms of therapy. But there are a few things that I want you to look out for signs that maybe this is not a real good fit. And then when we get to, I'm going to do a very quick away mission later, which is about where you might want to start to get help. So number one, your therapy is mysterious. What I mean by this is it's very unclear what the therapist is doing, what you should be doing, and how this works, what makes it effective. Your therapy should always have some type of goal, and you should know what that goal is. What are we working on? How do I work on it? And how do I get better? Those are things that should be pretty clear and transparent to you from the outset of therapy. And if they're not, you should ask these questions like, how am I going to get better? What do I have to do to get better? And what experience do you have working on these kind of problems? Number two is you're not really developing any new skills. Every therapy should be helping you to develop some type of new skill. Doesn't mean every week you're going to learn about plexing, but it does mean that you're developing new abilities over time, whether it's about learning different ways to cope with anxiety, or learning what do you do when you are experiencing depression, or when you feel like you might have been rejected from a group of people, trying to understand what happened and how you can approach that situation maybe a little bit differently in the future. You should always be working on some type of new skills. And then the last thing is that your therapy doesn't have any type of homework. What I mean by homework is some way for you to continue the work you're doing with your therapist outside of therapy. At best, you see your therapist for 50 minutes a week. At worst, it might be less time than that and not every week. So you don't have a lot of time with this person. But one of the things that this person should be helping you to do is helping you to learn how you can continue this work on your own. I always would tell people, I only see you for an hour a week. You have most of your life is outside of this office. So here's how I want you to practice this week so you can actually start to make progress. When you go to see a coach, when you're working on learning a musical instrument, they always give you exercises that you need to do on your own so you can practice and get better. Therapy is no different. In fact, I would tell a lot of people, I'm just like a coach. I know how to get you from A to B.
Or a piano teacher.
Or a piano teacher. Yeah, I know how to get you from A to B. But I can't go on that field in game day. I can't play the game for you. I'm going to teach you what you need to know. We're going to work together. We're going to learn the stuff here, and then you have to practice it on your own.
I can only give you the bad metaphors once a week. You have to.
I can only give you the bad food metaphors once a week. So if you want to learn more about that, check out my video on signs you're getting bad cognitive behavioral therapy. Maybe someone can share that in the comments. It has a lot more details there. But Larry, let's jump in. We're going warp speed here. Let's jump into the K3 factor.
Oh.
This is where you do a deep dive into some aspect of the canon.
And this is a deep dive that may not be as deep as it used to be. I was looking at the date. So the Blu-rays came out in 2014 for season 6 of Next Generation. But until then, this was a big moment for some people that were paying attention. But a lot of people. So the very famous, celebrated Scotty episode on Next Generation, Relics, which was such a talk about Nepenthe. Okay, well the Nepenthe of Next Generation, well, they had 2 or 3 moments. The whole point was, there was no bloody A, B, or C, or D. You had the original cast and then the Next Gen cast. And having McCoy in the pilot was a big deal. And everybody was like, well, when will Kirk or Spock be in the Next Generation if you're in real-time viewing of this? And so before Spock was, well, after Spock was there, but there was also the Scotty show where they got James Doohan into Next Generation with the transporter loop. Ingenious plot. Ron Moore wrote it. So number one, fan wrote the thing.
Yeah.
And everybody in the Next Gen cast got a spotlight scene he's mostly with Geordi, the 2 engineers. But everybody had a moment with him. And Picard's is especially memorable because they walk in a holodeck of the original series bridge, and that was a whole thing unto itself. Making it, and then everybody going, oh my God! And the story of how they made it, and all of that was wonderful. And at the end, they come up with spoilers. They came up with a decision. They gave him a shuttle and just let him go, find himself, and have fun. Yeah. Because he's a century out of time, right? He's still. Yes. That's the point of the episode. Is he a relic, or is he still a viable person? And they come up with for his mental health, he's a viable person. Well, along that path, the last scene is everybody wishing him bye, and he goes over and he kisses Troy, and the viewer in the moment said,
"Right.
Why is he kissing Troy goodbye? Did he ever see her?" And if you watch the episode in 1992 or 3, he didn't, because the aired episode had to cut. Was reading last night. The show was 8 minutes long. They had to cut, which is not a problem anymore. But back in the old days, shows had to be cut for time. So anyway, but I knew I had the script anyway. I'd never seen the footage, but I knew what the scene was. It was awesome. And as of the Blu-rays, now this is not quite such a deep dive, because if you've got the Blu-rays, the deleted scenes, you can see the scene. But I've got a still here. It's a wonderful scene because Troy goes into LaForge says you should go see, and this is off my screen. I didn't have my Blu-ray player set up to make a clip. LaForge says, or they tell him to go see somebody about feeling, or no, he doesn't. He's in his quarters, and she comes to see him to help him with his adjustment, in her good counselor way. Wow, what a shock you must have been through. And of course, she's beautiful. He's all playing the Scottish
the original
gentleman.
series Scottish, yes.
Yeah. Hey, Linda. He's like thrilled to see her. This beautiful lass comes to see him and talk to him, and she's talking, and they're just chatting about, my God, what a shock you've been through. and she at one point she'd said, "Hi, I'm the ship's counselor." Blah 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 blah. Well, that's not terminology he's used to hearing, and he's still kind of swept up by her. And he's talking along, and some of I don't know how many everybody if you've seen the scene, then yeah, you know what I'm doing here. But if you haven't seen it, I think a lot of our folks probably hadn't had a chance to, or it's lost in the shuffle of all the deleted scenes out there. But it's great for our topic today because here's an old school. It's kind of a metaphor for today. Here's an old school aging member of this organization, which Starfleet, from a time when something newfangled came along. It's like when the ag school trained farm researchers fanned out in the Dust Bowl to try to teach farmers the new ways of farming, and all the old farmers that had been doing it for 40 years were like, I don't need some whippersnapper out of college to come tell me how to do my job. I don't know where that came from, but that's like the first thing I thought of here. Here's Scotty, who'd not had a counselor on his ship. The moment she starts prying and probing a little bit, and he's like, wait a minute, what exactly does a counselor do? And she says, well, I help you, blah, 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 blah. And he goes like, you're a psychologist. I don't need a psychologist. And he does the whole thing about, I don't need this. Just like Mariner does in Lower Decks. I don't need therapy.
Right.
And, he does. He needs some help, whether therapy means I'm going to be going an hour for 20 years and I'm a Mr. Carlin and I never get any better, Bob Newhart show reference, or whether it's a one-off like we see Culber get with Cornwell, whatever the need is in the moment. But the whole idea of going to a therapist, going to a psychologist, he's old school. He gets up and he marches out of the room, and she's kind of going, oh, she tried. But it's like not only does he not want to be there, he feels like he was tricked into going.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was I felt bad for Marina here and the Troy character to have that cut. That was one of the pieces of scene that hoping they would find, which I didn't know why they wouldn't. So of all the deleted scenes that have been shown on these bonus features on these DVDs over the years, that's one that I especially love for that reason. I always felt sad that she got left out of the Relics wrap-up. But for today's topic, I thought it was really cool that they wrote a scene, and she didn't even do anything badly. For your this was late in the series, so it wasn't like it was a bad scene or anything.
It was a good, totally.
But it was very human. It was very human, and maybe a century throwback to the quasi-perfect humans of Kirk's time. Even more so a century later. But it was a very human reaction to somebody. Like, you're sneaking in here trying to fix me. Get out of it. And what's great is, what we don't realize is, as you watch the show aired, he argues with Geordi, and he regrets it. Geordi talks about, you're just an old man and you're in the way, you know what we're doing, so please get out of my way. That's in essence what Geordi's telling him. And he's insulted and angry and stomps off, and instantly Geordi feels bad. You can see it.
Yeah.
And the show cuts for him going right from there, right into 10, like, oh, I heard you guys have a bar here. Kind of a thing. And they go right to that scene. And what happens is that's where the Troy scene was. So what happens really is he goes from Geordi, goes back to his quarters. She comes to see him. He stomps out of his own guest quarters. He leaves her and says, I don't need a psychologist. I know what I need. And he heads for the bar. So that's the context of him going to 10 forward that we miss by that scene being deleted. But it's also, again, a great real life story of a lot of people going, I don't need that. It actually leads into one of the last images that I gave you. If we're talking about informal therapy. Yeah. I thought it would also be. So there's your K3.
I think that's a great K3, and that scene actually, Larry, it adds more texture.
Were you aware of that scene? Had you seen it?
No. That's what I'm about to say. I have those Blu-rays. I haven't seen that scene. I own that Blu-ray. I need to watch that. I'm gonna quite literally do that later today.
Disc 1, everybody. Season 6, Disc 1.
The thing I really like about that is, I'm gonna use one of your favorite words here, is texture. It adds more texture to the scene between Scotty and Picard, where he's on the Enterprise 1701, no bloody A, B, C, or D, and he's also he's drinking, and he feels such a sense of loss and also disconnection.
Mhm.
And knowing that he had the scene with Troy earlier, it adds more depth there that he is able to connect with the captain of the Enterprise, and in that connection, he also realizes how disconnected he is and how out of time he is. Beautiful
And
scene,
and
really well
Picard's
done.
playing a little counselor. Well, they're all doing it
Yes.
because everybody as a human being gets it. Here's a guy that's 100 years out of
Yeah.
joint in a wacky
Yeah.
sci-fi way, but he's still a human having to live this. And Geordi is normally a very empathetic guy, but he's got a job to do, and he was frustrated in the moment, and he feels bad about it. Everybody else has got a little bit of a luxury to be able to go,
Yeah.
oh, especially Picard, yeah, and connect that.
Um, Libby says, "Can we do a whole show on therapists who aren't therapists on Star Trek?" That's a great idea,
I think
Libby.
so, because we've got a
Uh,
whole list of them that we're probably not, yeah, we're not going to get to. Yeah.
yeah, so we'll keep that as a topic for the future.
Okay, then save some of those images I sent you. Then
I am gonna save. I'm saving these for that time. Larry, before we jump into the away mission, there's something interesting happening, and
Oh
I'd
yeah.
love your take on this. What's happening next Friday?
So next Friday, it's not quite as big as some recent events, but Friday night, Kalea and Jay at Science Division, who are the people that do the automated, chip-activated triples, which are awesome. They're having a little virtual fun night. There you go, 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. We're just going to have what amounts to a fun little tribble panel, and then do some tribble trivia and have some prizes. It's not a big, huge event. It's just, an hour and a half. But I'm just inviting everybody to come over and join us. If you're seeing this during the week later, it's go to their page, sciencedivision.com, and they're going to put a Zoom link up, just a few hours before the start time. And we'll just have some fun and some prizes. There'll be some Portal 47 prizes and amongst some Science Division triple prizes. So I just want to let everybody know that's coming up
Yeah,
amid
yeah.
all the virtual. Also, I gave you
Lots.
another slide for something that's happening in just a couple of hours, if you can put it up.
Couple of hours, Larry. This
No,
one?
not that one. Not that one. The other one that looks like a rerun slide from
Oh my
last week.
gosh. I don't think I have it for some reason. Oh no, tell me, Larry. Tell me while I look for it.
No, here at 1 o'clock Pacific, just in a couple hours here, we're going to rerun our cocktail party from our virtual cocktail party from last. So it's going to be run all
Oh,
3 hours.
right.
You can, just as when it was live, you can dip. There's no live chat, obviously, because it's the thing. But we had over 20 guests, including Armin and Kitty, and Armin Sherman and Kitty Swink, and John Billingsley, and Dan Curry, and Mary Chifo, and we realized it was Tamlin Tomita's first Star Trek fan event. Was the party last week. So anyway, who was Commodore O, a bad girl, but still a wonderful person, and a person you want to meet. She was like really clear on a couple of things that she's for. Chase, a lot of fan podcasters, our science folks. Anyway, it was a great 3 hours.
Look at this list. It's a very big list.
There's
Very
the
big list
run
of folks.
time today from 1 to 4 Pacific. It's on Twitch. Everybody on Twitch. Hi, Twitchers that we've been ignoring. Twitch.tv/Outpost13 is the channel, and they've got things running. So anyway, from 1 to 4, we're going to rerun this, and there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of fun moments happen.
Yep.
So I wanted to throw that out there too.
I'm going to do a very quick away mission here because I want to jump into the comments, and we're running on a tight timeline today. So my away mission is really about how do you start? So if you're looking to get therapy, how do you start? Well, the number one thing I want to encourage people is if you're looking for a therapist and you already are connected to a healthcare provider you trust, ask them. So if you have a primary care physician that you go see, a nurse practitioner, anyone that you feel like you have a good relationship with, ask them. They probably know folks in your area and maybe folks who take your insurance as well. I know we are in America where we don't have a nationalized healthcare system. If you live in a country where you do, your options are going to be you're going to have even more options than you do in the United States, but that's a good place to start. The next thing to do is if you do have insurance, you can call your insurance provider and ask for recommendations for people who might be seeking, who might be therapists, and always ask for 3. Don't just stop at 1 because sometimes therapists get full. If you're a college student, you probably have access to college counseling services that are either free or low cost at your college or university. You can always ask friends or family if they have a recommendation. There are a number of online directories that you can go to. If anyone's interested in those, let me know in the comments. I can share some lists. And then in the United States and in many other countries, there are referral services that will help you to get connected with a therapist as well. In the United States, NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, has a helpline. You can call them and they will help you through this process of finding a therapist. SAMHSA, SAMHSA, also has a helpline as well that you can call, and they'll get you through this.
Society of American Mental Health
Substance Abuse Mental Health Support Alliance, I think very different. Yeah, okay. I'll post some of these resources in the comment section once we're done. So in the interest of
the page.
Yes, on the page. On our Facebook group, I'll share it there. Good idea, Larry. So if you're not already a member, go to our Facebook group. It's Life Support Live, and we got this topic idea from you all. We asked you, based on this week's Lower Decks, what episode or what topic you want to explore, and so we explored this topic. So I'll share those resources there. So yes, I agree, Linda. NAMI is amazing. So with that, Larry, let's do a rapid fire round of hailing frequencies. Yeah. There's a lot of comments. There's lot was going on.
There's so many good comments here, and of all the weeks to cut things a little short, but we're gonna basically split this into a part 2 as of this command decision. Yeah. So we'll do our informal counselors in later. But I just want to say what you just said early in the chat here. I think it was Libby talking about how she did try to take advantage of campus-based, college-based mental health facilities, and it was being manned by grad students, and it wasn't the most. She had an interesting saga, but the bottom line was it wasn't the best outcome. It wasn't the most. Talk about a junior counselor who hadn't finished their training. That's kind of what she was enduring there. But a lot of folks doing some sharing through. Yeah.
Quick comment about that is it can be very hit or miss when you're seeing someone who's in training. Sometimes you get better treatment actually from someone who's in training. I've obviously been in training, and one of the things that's very different when you're a training therapist, you're seeing a much smaller caseload. So your therapist is actually spending a lot of time preparing and thinking about how to best support you. And they probably are supervised with audio or videotape supervision. So not only do they watch back everything they're doing, but their supervisor does as well. Sometimes that means you get way more attention on you and much better treatment. Sometimes it means you're also getting less experienced treatment. So it's hit or miss. Yeah.
No, guys, I really want to thank everybody in the chat. We've had some, I want to say a shout out to Stella, who I think is one new, who was here earlier on anyway. A few other people I'm madly looking to see that I thought were new. Everybody doing a really good job of sharing today. Everybody's cross-talking, which is wonderful. Wonderful. People talking about, Jared and Libby here talking about the effects of being unemployed, a lot of the rounds of layoffs, people trying to deal with that, people being their own informal counselors to their friends, if they can be. But yeah, finding a lot of stories here about finding a fit with a therapist, which I agree is totally finding one that you think is, and I hate to say this, I mean, this is, again, the shock that I had. One of the shocks in the 90s I had was that they don't know all the answers, that therapies, including medication therapies, are evolving and can even, in some cases, be still primitive. It's like, oh, thanks, I get to pioneer this when I just want things done and known, and just give me the damn thing. I don't want to be part of your experiment to make things better in 30 years. But also that therapists, are not always the best ones. And sadly, if you're like waiting, oh, good, I've got insurance. I hate to say this, but sometimes the therapists who are on insurance plans may not be the most competent, the most experienced, the best ones. And sometimes there have been a couple of times when I need to, even medical doctors, I had to go find a doctor. I don't mean brain surgery. I mean like knowing a specific niche of something, even medication prescribing. And to find, it's weird to think about you have to go here, put your ear to the ground and listen. But I was finally found a medical doctor who charged less than a psychiatrist, who was an expert who was very proficient at a certain couple of medications, or prescriptions, and actually went to an MD who was kind of making it among her portfolio, making it her life's work to help people competently in a couple of areas where a lot of people it was just not a focus. I'm not saying they were
Yeah.
incompetent, but it just wasn't a focus. But it was a huge lesson in how, our system is far from perfect, and people are far from
Yeah,
perfect,
Larry, I
and all
really
of that.
agree with that. There's a lot of problems to our mental health system.
Our
There's a big
delivery
difference
system.
between surgeries and therapy. Surgeries are largely public. They're not public, meaning there's a lot of people in the room. There's checklists. There's procedures that you have to follow. Therapy is behind closed doors. It has to be confidential. It has to be secret. But that also means sometimes accountability is not quite as good as it is in other professions. One of the things that I hate most about therapy is how so much of it is not transparent. So there's a lot of problems in our system. And I just want to mention, Jared said over here about having
This
21
is
friends.
this is what I
This
was
is
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, Jared mentioned this much earlier, having 21 friends get laid off at Disney in the same day. We saw that news this week about the layoffs that are happening. Jared,
But
we
for
were talking
Gerald's sake,
offline.
I felt like I'd been hit by a train after all of his friends are calling, go, oh my God. Well,
Yeah.
when it's one person, that's one thing. But when 21 of your friends are all slamming you, now it's a bit of your problem too.
It's compassion fatigue.
Right.
You
Yes.
can get exhausted from helping people. It can be very overwhelming. There's also something called vicarious trauma, which is when you're consistently helping people who have gone through traumatic things. It has an effect on you. It can change the way you see the world. So there's also a lot of challenges here. A lot of challenges to being in this field. Um, Jared mentioned I am dropping more tapestry references than Larry. But there's always a week for this.
I'm an
I
equal
think
opportunity tapestrist. Yeah.
I'm trying to go through the comments here quickly to make sure I'm not missing any of the big picture stuff. I think maybe some folks had reactions to my use of coaching as a term, and one thing I want to say here is I always try to understand when I'm working with someone one on one. I always try to understand what are the things that they're interested in and passionate about. I ask those very early on, and then I try to tailor all my
Mm.
analogies and metaphors related to their interests. So, unlike our bird therapist in Lower Decks this week, who just uses food analogies over and over, it's really important that the way you share the information resonates with what the person values and understands. So, if I learn early on that someone is really into sports, then I do more sports-based analogies. But if I understand early on that they love Star Trek, Star Wars, science fiction, fantasy, then I might talk about I'm going to be your Gandalf. Gandalf. I am going to help you learn along the way, but I can't throw the ring in Mount Doom, or I'll use analogies that are more related to Star Trek, whatever it is. So it has to be tailored and responsive to the person's culture, their passions, their pursuits, the
Hmm.
ideas that they love.
So you're not just being patronizing, is what you're saying.
You can't. Otherwise, you lose that trust. It gets back to the issue of trust that we were
I know.
talking
It's
about.
it's for the connection. By the way, the bird doctor's name is Miglamo. Say his name.
Miglamo.
Miglamo.
Miglamo!
We
That's what
don't
it
know his
is.
species. They've shown Aurelians, the two avianoids in the animated series. We've seen them in Lower Decks already, or at least the one. They both look alike. And this looks more like a Looney Tunes Birdman than we'll see. We'll see what this species is of avianoid. People sharing their story. I was trying to see. We had I know. Hi Jamal and Noor. Don't see some folks we've had circle back. Earl Grey Trekkie 1701 over on YouTube. Hi.
Yeah,
If
welcome.
this is the first week. I said hi to Stella. Somebody, I think Phil Barnes has been with us before. Rose, our friend Rose, who said, I
Good
like
to see you again, Rose.
what she said here. I just want to know if that person is an incompetent therapist or doctor. Do the one thing they should not do. Do they make things worse? Not to make things worse or injure their don't make things worse. Do no harm.
Do no harm.
Even unwittingly, yeah. And sometimes they don't intend to, but if they haven't surveyed enough.
And if they say something that really hits you the hard way, they need to repair that.
And we have stories of that happening here. Of people sharing.
Yeah, we do have a lot of stories of that. Like this, two things need to happen. Sometimes you do get into difficult stuff that might make you feel angry or upset or sad. That's a big part of therapy, is helping you to be able to approach and learn how to manage difficult emotions. At the same time, you should know that that's part of the plan, that is what's going to happen. You should have informed consent that this is where we're headed in treatment. These are the things that we need to help you to learn how to experience. Sometimes the challenges can be if that's not made very transparent, or if you find yourself exploring things that you were not necessarily ready for or on board with exploring. I think Heidi also had a comment about a therapist who reacted personally to things that she was discussing. And therapy should never be about the therapist. Sometimes, yes, you might talk about your feelings and your thoughts about the therapist, because patterns that happen in the outside world can repeat in the therapist's office. But if you're ever talking about your relationship with the therapist, it should only be in the pursuit of your own goals. Like I'll give you a quick example, Larry, and I know we're running over on time. But sometimes if my patients were consistently late or canceled on me last minute, and this was a big pattern, we would talk about that. And I would talk about, hey, so this happened. I'm concerned about this for this reason. And I'm also curious, does this happen elsewhere in your life? Oh, okay, so it is a pattern that happens elsewhere in your life. Well, I just want to share how it impacts me, because I think other people in your life probably also feel the same way. So if it's ever about the therapist, it should always be about the patient's goals and how this can help you to move forward on the goals. And it always has to be intentional, not personal. I don't know if that helps, but
another shout out to Orville Nation. So thank you for coming over from the Orville Nation on YouTube, who thought it was an interesting show today. So glad to see you. Also, Jamal has a very good point. Obviously, he's basically saying no wonder Troy did well with Soji, or at least picked up that she was a synth right off because of all her years with Data.
With all her years of Data, yeah.
As an Android, now that synth is the new PC term for Android, apparently.
I love that.
And I'm only halfway through the chat, guys, so I'm really sorry for being so, but we got caught up in our topic. We got lost in the part. Speaking of plexing, Polycorp or whatever it was.
Yeah, I think Scott was having a good discussion about the line between being a friend and supporting someone more so. I would say if you're a friend, be a good friend, and you can be supportive, be a good listener. When it feels like you might be getting pushed into a position where you're being asked to do more, then your responsibility as a friend is more about helping the person to get the professional help they need. So a good friend will help people to get help when they need it. That's how I like to think about it, although I know that line can sometimes get very blurred.
Yeah, Tim Hands here mentioned Phlox on Enterprise. Kind of like McCoy, not a standard psychologist, but he obviously obviously canceled people from T'Pol to Archer to, they were writing the book on everything on Starfleet. They'd barely been in deep space, and he was doing his best to pioneer some things too.
Jared sounds like was talking about boundaries, and Jared, boundaries are really confusing right now. You all are looking at me in my home. There have been episodes early on in the show where my daughter ran in here until I figured out how to put a lock on that door. Boundaries are very difficult to have right now, as many of us are struggling ourselves. With our own mental health. Larry and I have talked about that in weeks prior when there's been wildfires and political turmoil and protests and police brutality. America's in a tough spot right now. It's very hard to have boundaries, and they're so important. They're so important to have as well. So I feel your struggle there with that. Definitely something I'm experiencing myself.
Hello, Stress-Free K, if you're still with us from YouTube.
Oh, yeah, stress-free. So I saw your comments here. We do watch Lower Decks. Yeah, we watch Lower Decks. We don't dive into spoilers about Lower Decks because not everyone in the world can see it, at least legally right now. But we love Lower Decks. This episode was inspired by this week's episode of Lower Decks. So I hope
and may I say, especially today, how fascinating it is that so many of our across-the-pond folks are commenting away.
It's so nice.
But I will say more.
There's a lot of great comments coming in. And Nathaniel said here, following along the dated psychoanalysis, it seems like there's always a need to externalize the captain's superego. So id, ego, superego, these classic ideas in psychoanalysis. I have friends that are modern day analysts and modern day psychodynamic therapists, and the stuff that we saw with Troy is nowhere near what people are doing now. What Freudian therapists are doing now just doesn't match up. Very dated, Larry.
Okay, I think maybe we should start playing the music, Ollie.
Let's play the music.
We can keep talking.
We can keep talking, but it is time for that part of the week, folks, where we play what is affectionately known as the sad music at the end of the hour. It's the same thing as a happy music in the beginning, but
it gives us a B-side for the single when we put it out, so.
Yeah. So, Larry, where can people find more of your work this week?
Well, hey, everything on LarryNemecek.com. At Twitter, it's at Larry Nemecek. If you go to LarryNemecek.com, the other thing is the open house for Portal 47, where we're going to announce our guest this year. Every year on the anniversary of Portal 47, we open the doors and let the world in. And I try to have an even bigger guest than usual. So that's coming up the end of October 29th. And if you go to LarryNemecek.com, you can click on and get your free seat now. And we'll have some pre-show prizes and that kind of thing, too. So we're going to announce the guest here in another week or so. But on top of everything else going on with me, that's happening. But yeah, at Larry Nemecek, Twitter, LarryNemecek.com. From there, you can get to all my Facebook pages and projects and all that stuff. Where you're watching now, if you're on Facebook, that's my Instagram account as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel.
I have so much more that I wish I could talk about, Larry, this week. I didn't even talk about support groups. Support groups are a great way into therapy. I think someone here in the comments was talking about that. Yeah, Linda was talking about NAMI has community support groups. Those are wonderful ways in. We didn't even talk about group therapy, which I think is one of the best ways to get therapy. If you're interested in mental health related topics, come on over to the Psych Show on YouTube, where I talk about psychology and mental health. I've got some big picture collaborations coming out this week. We're going into World Mental Health Week. A lot of stuff's happening there, so check me out on YouTube at youtube.com/The Psych Show. You can also follow me on social media, Instagram and Twitter at Mattu. And in the meantime, please join us on the Facebook group for Life Support Live. We keep the conversation going. We get your feedback. We do some fun little video caption or photo captions. We will be there this week. And Larry,
it's free to post. Please, everybody, if you're on the page, feel free to post your own and start some threads. And
We'll be back next week with the season finale of Star Trek Lower Decks. See you then, folks.
Hey,
Live
trek
long and
well,
prosper.
everybody.